Hey, my name's TC Burr. Welcome to Yet, a podcast created to encourage you to get your goal or idea out of your head and into reality. On this podcast, you'll hear stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas to help you write your book, start your business, launch your podcast, or whatever it is you hope to accomplish. Because it's not that you haven't done it, it's just that you haven't done it yet. Hey listeners, welcome to another episode of the Yet podcast. Today on the podcast, to outline or not to outline, that is the question. If you don't know me, welcome. If it's your first time here, I am so glad you decided to listen to the podcast today. My name is TC Burr, and about a year ago, I started writing my very first novel. Now, there's a whole backstory into why I started writing, but basically, this was something that I've wanted to do for a long time, but I put it off for years and years and years until finally I had kind of this light bulb moment and I realized it's time for me to start. So I've been doing that pretty consistently for the last year and I've learned a lot along the way. One of the things I've learned is that there are kind of two different schools of thought when it comes to writing an outline for a book. So many novelists kind of gravitate toward one extreme or the other. The first is for those who are plotters. So they plot out everything about their outline, their book. They kind of have a plan going in. They know what they're going to do and they go for it. The other is kind of more by the seat of your pants as the inspiration leads. You just write really without an outline. So which process, which method is better? Well, I think the short answer is it really depends on you as a writer, your style, your preference, and what feels most natural. But I want to talk a little bit about kind of the differences and where I see some of the strengths and risks of each. So to do that, I'm going to actually read from my blog. So this is going to be an audio version of blog posts that I've written here in the recent weeks. If you want to read the text version of these, you can find my blog at tcburr.com. I'd invite you to do that. But I'm essentially just going to read these blog posts to you because I think they make great content for a podcast as well. So I'm going to start with the first post, and then I have a second one that kind of is the companion piece to that. So the first one is called, Do You or Don't You Create an Outline? To outline or not to outline? That is the question. Sorry, I've been on a bit of a Shakespeare kick since my wife and I went to see an open air play on our date night last week. It was an amazing experience sitting under the stars and taking in such great art alongside my bride. The question remains, though, is it best to outline your book before writing or to get straight to writing? When it comes to novelists, most of us tend toward one of two extremes. We're either plotters or we are pantsers. Plotters are those who create a writing outline of their book, shaping the plot and direction before they sit down to write. Pantsers, on the other hand, are those who write, quote, by the seat of their pants. There are pros and cons to each approach, I think, but the bottom line is this. You'll need to implement some structure into your novel at some point. It's up to you as the author to decide if you prefer to do this heavy lifting up front or do it retroactively. So, making the case for plotting. Are you someone who likes to have a plan? Maybe in your house or office, everything has its place and order reigns supreme. You chart out the route you take on a vacation, knowing in advance every food and gas stop you'll make along the way. If that sounds like you might be a plotter. The benefits of plotting, which again is just kind of writing out your book outline, are many, but here are just a few. Benefit number one, you have a clear path and direction when you sit down to write, which may actually make the writing part easier. If you know the basic plot development of what a book or chapter is going to be about, then you can jumpstart your process on those days when you aren't feeling particularly inspired. Benefit number two of being a plotter, you may need less time editing on the back end. I want to make this super clear. If you are writing a book, you are going to need to edit. I need to say it again. You are absolutely going to have to edit your book at some point. But if you follow an outline, you may spend less time editing at least the structure of your story. And believe me, that part can and does often take a good bit of time. Benefit number three of being a plotter, you may find it easier to market your book. So I'm going to touch on this idea in a couple episodes coming up, but recently I asked a group of published authors, what is one thing that you didn't anticipate when writing your book? And literally, almost all of them responded back with some version of, it was the time and the effort that you have to put into marketing your book. So I'm going to bring in a couple of guests in the coming weeks who can help us think through this aspect of our writing. But it is clear that no matter the publishing route you take, if you want your book to be read widely, you're going to need to do some marketing. Following an outline will give you a more clear and crisp answer to the question, what is your book about? Which can help you write a synopsis, write copy for your author website, share content to social media, or even tell a friend about your book over a cup of coffee. So what about you? Do you find yourself more of a plotter or a pantser? Now I'm going to move on to my next blog post, which I will highlight the perspective of the fiction author like me who writes without an outline. So this post is titled Risk and Reward, Writing Without an Outline. And again, you can find this and read the text version of it at tcburr.com. Do you love working with a blank canvas? Do you think the best adventures are those that are unstructured or unplanned? Does the idea of writing an outline, or does the idea of a writing outline make you feel trapped? If that sounds familiar, this post is for you. In my last blog post, I talked about the two outlining extremes that many novelists gravitate toward. Those who outline their entire novels up front, the plotters, and those who write by the seat of their pants, the pantsers. In that post, I highlighted a few of the benefits of plotting, and for this one, I want to highlight the perspective of the non-outliners, the pantsers. Can I just say, I hate that name, by the way, but I didn't come up with it, and it seems like it is here to stay. So let's talk about the perspective of the pantsers. I love having a sense of freedom. My work in progress novel is set in a physical place that for me represents ultimate freedom. It's got flowing rivers, mountain air, bright sunshine, and I am here saying yes and amen. Give me a blank canvas, an empty calendar, an open road, and a full tank of gas. For me, there are few things that are more exhilarating than setting out on an uncharted path. And that's how I write too. But while there are some amazing benefits to writing without an outline, there are also a few risks to look out for too, many of which I'm learning as a writer on the fly. Here are just a few of the benefits and some risks of writing without an outline. Benefit number one, you'll have complete and total freedom to follow your inspiration. This one is so big for me because part of the reason I took up writing in the first place was to express my creativity in a way that didn't feel caged in or prescribed. I find that I write best when I'm not limiting myself to any predefined criteria, characters, or constraints, even if they're self-imposed ones. But a risk that kind of goes along with it is writer's block can be very real. If you're writing just according to your inspiration, what happens when you aren't feeling particularly inspired? I've got a future podcast episode coming up where I'll share some of my thoughts about how you can keep going when you're not feeling inspired. But if you're writing without an outline, this one can be a particular challenge. A benefit, though, of writing without an outline is that writing your story may feel every bit like an adventure as if you were reading it. So when you're not following an outline, writing that initial draft gives you a front row seat on an adventure full of twists and turns that may not be possible if you're following a script. So the way that I write is I just start writing and see where the story goes, which is so fun to do. But a risk of doing it that way is your draft may, and I know this from firsthand experience, your draft may end up feeling somewhat disconnected and rambling. So this definitely happened to me. I ended up with 65,000 words that felt related, but not necessarily connected or cohesive. So you'll follow a thread one day, chase a rabbit the next, and some portions will be left unfinished or land you at a dead end. So if you've heard this podcast before, you've heard me describe this as kind of pieces of a jigsaw puzzle just scattered on a table. There's some sections that are put together and you can kind of see the picture that's being formed. There's other sections where it's just kind of random pieces scattered, and some pieces may even belong to a different puzzle. So that's one of the risks, is that you may not end up with as cohesive of a finished draft. A benefit, though, is you'll have a ton of material to work with in round two. So now that you've written just kind of stream of consciousness, getting all those words out there, now you've got a ton of great raw material to work with when you go to edit and refine your manuscript.
Again, I've referred to this as ingredients to make a great meal or pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. So now you, as the author, have the fun job of going and making the delicious dish or putting that puzzle together. Here's a risk, and this is more of a psychological one, to writing without an outline. One of the risks that you might experience is the process of writing may feel longer or more difficult. So I say it might feel longer or more difficult, even if it isn't. So if you're like me, your perspective on when someone starts writing can vary depending on whether they outline up front or not. So if you start with an outline, you may consider that work as prep work or research or background work. And then only after your outline is complete do you start the mental clock on writing. So you see, if you do that, you front loaded your process with structure, and your first manuscript is probably going to need fewer structural edits, maybe. But if you're a pantser, the clock starts right away. So the minute you sit down to write, you have started writing. And so the overall process may feel a little bit longer or more arduous, even if it isn't. So which is better? Is it better to plot out your novel from start to finish and then start writing? Or is it better to just go and see what happens? As I said earlier, eventually you're going to have to incorporate some structure into your novel. Starting with an outline can be a great way to keep going when inspiration wanes, and it can provide you some wonderful structure upon which to build your story. But for some, that approach may feel limiting. In some cases, though, writing without an outline can lead to the uncomfortable feeling like you're flying blind. If you're willing to try it, writing first and outlining later can set you up for success because you'll have some great building blocks from which to begin when you get to that point. Characters will have been developed, storylines will begin to emerge, but now it's up to you, storyteller, to start piecing things together and crafting those ingredients into something amazing. Ultimately, you don't have to feel the pressure to declare a major here and decide on only one writing style. That's the beauty of it. You should feel the freedom to experiment with different methods and techniques and find what feels most natural and rewarding to you, because it's your story after all. Like I said in episode 0 of this podcast, you make the rules. So, love to hear your thoughts. Are you more of a plotter or a pantser? Let me know which process works better for you and why. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Love for some interaction on this one. Love to know which way is best for you. Have you tried either, found success or failure with one or the other? We'd love to connect and hear your story. So thank you so much for listening. That's it for today. Again, you can read the text version of this podcast on my blog at tcburr.com. If you got value out of this episode, I would love it if you would write a review on Apple Podcasts. Those reviews mean so much to me, and they're such an encouragement to read and hear thoughts of listeners like you. So write me a review, share this podcast with a friend. I would love to get this word out to more and more people. I think there's so many great stories that are yet to be told, and I want to connect and encourage as many people as possible to get started and to keep going. So until next time, remember, it is not that you haven't done it. It's just that you haven't done it yet. Later.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you would do me a huge favor, if you got value out of this podcast, which I'm assuming maybe you did since you're still here, would you scroll down to the bottom of your podcast app and rate and review the show? And maybe share it with someone on social media or with a friend, just in a conversation. It would mean so much to get this message out to more people, and I think it would be amazing if you would share it. So that would be, as a personal favor to me, I'd really love it. Also, if you want to know more about me and what I'm working on, you can visit my website. It's tcburr.com. I hope you'll check it out. You can contact me there. Thanks again, and I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.